called the body of God. And my purpose for this is to show that within the Hebrew Scriptures, we have several places, numerous places, that talk of God having a body. And because of that, well, I'm going to read the first part of this, and then I'm going to read the last part. You'll read the latter part there. Within the Hebrew Scriptures, God is described as having body parts, normally associated with human beings. Beyond saying that God hears, sees, and speaks, body parts are used to describe these activities. I'm fully aware that describing God with body parts are metaphors designed by God to help relate to humanity, since we have body parts too. If God wanted to ensure that no one could ever think that he could take on a body, why risk even the idea by using human body parts to describe him? Traditional Judaism has consistently denied Yeshua could be God, since it's impossible for God to clothe himself in human skin. For the next few moments, let's look at several places in Hebrew Scripture where God is described with human features. Any one of these in isolation may not mean much, but the composite convergence doesn't seem far-fetched, thank Yeshua, when we look at the bigger picture. And I go on to give you body parts from the Hebrew Scripture. Now, I end with this. In summary, we have seen that God can be described as having a face, eyes, ears, nose, finger, hand, and arm. While this list is not exhaustive, it's sufficient to show that the Hebrew Scripture was not hesitant to speak of God using human body parts to make the point. We admit that many of these body parts are used as metaphors and within idioms that move beyond the literalness of a physical body part. However, if God can be compared with body parts, use body parts, or be described as having body parts, is it too far a stretch that one day he could actually incarnate to a full body like you and I? Let me suggest that by using human body parts to describe God, the authors of the Hebrew Scripture were laying the foundation for Yeshua to encapsulate God within a human body. So, I want to read through this because I go through and give you the places where we talk about face, eyes and ears, nose, finger, hand, arm. You can read that for yourself, but what I'm trying to show is that all the way through the Scriptures, the Hebrew Scriptures, and I'm going to write some more on this, but there was body parts being used to describe God. It said God has a nose, God has a hand, God has an eye. You know, he sees. Beyond just saying God sees or God hears, which that would have been one thing. But not only does he see, and not only does he hear, not only does he speak, but he has an eye, and he has a nose, and he has an ear. So God is described using these, and that kind of moves us towards this incarnational possibility. If I wanted to be, or I've said it this way, if I wanted to be really, really careful, then I never hinted that God could have body. And by the way, the reason I bring this up is because, like I said, traditional Judaism says the reason why Jesus can't be God is because he has body. He has a body. Well, therefore, that makes him not God. And one of Maimonides' tenets is that God could not take on bodily form. This has been a major issue in traditional Judaistic thinking that, well, God, see, this is why Jesus can't be God, because he's got a body, and God can't have body. And what I'm trying to show is the Hebrew Scriptures were moving us towards this God has a body concept all the way through it. Yes?
Where did Maimonides get this idea then?
Well, because you have verses that say things like this. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. So this would, from Maimonides' perspective, verses like that, for instance, would preclude the thinking that God could take on and veil himself in body. Those kind of verses.
How do you get that from something like that? In fact, we have the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. That doesn't mean that he's not still one.
Yeah, I don't know all their reasoning. I'm not saying I understand all their reasoning. As you read different authors, though, they're very convinced within traditional Judaism that God, the other one is, what's the guy? He's up in Seattle. I can see the book. Why Jews Have Rejected Jesus is the title of the book. And one of the things he says in there is that, again, God cannot take on body. God is spirit. We can't see God. Oh, and that's another one, is you have verses that say, you have certain verses in the Tanakh that say, you can't see God and live.
What do they do with the whole we were made in his image? I mean, doesn't that automatically assume that we have a body?
I think it moves that direction as well. See, these are the counter arguments to this as well. So I'm just saying, there are some arguments on the other side that would say, well, no one can see God and live. And the only way you can see God is if he has a body. Therefore, how do we see him? And yet we have also Hebrew texts that say they saw God. Now, they would argue, and I might argue the same, but that they saw a veiled form of him. They didn't see him in all his fullness. They saw him veiled in flesh, as I would argue Yeshua was. So these are the kind of counter-arguments you see within this discussion. And I'm just trying to show that I think the text was moving us towards the incarnation, toward the embodiment of God in Yeshua by saying, hey, he's got a face. Oh, by the way, God's got an arm, and God has an eye, and God has an ear, and God has a mouth. All these, using these metaphors, I realize they're metaphors, but using those is huge. Yes?
I wonder, this is just off the top of my head, I wonder if it has to do with flesh being associated with sin. And maybe they felt that since
that might be some of it, that humanity is tainted by death and by sin, and God cannot be. How can God take on human flesh and thereby enter into our taint of death and sin?
Yeah.
And that's another issue. Is this is one of the issues that is raised. And you're good to bring it up. Is that Yeshua does come to this earth, and in his humanity, he does die, just like you and I will. He does die. So, and that's another thing they ask is then, well, hold on, if you guys say he's God, how does God die? So now that becomes another issue. Okay, sorry.
What do they do with something like with Moses, pushing the cleft of the rock and you can't see my face, I'll put my hand.
But you can see my back.
See my back.
Right. He says, I'll let you see this kind of contrail. I'll let you see my back in the text. Okay, you'll see the back. So God has a backside.
And his feet on
yeah, so we're going to see all these different. Now, here's what they would say. Two things, and I admitted these straight up in the paper, is that these are metaphors. These are metaphors. So they would say, look, it's not that God has an eye, it's that we talk about him like he has an eye. And these are idioms. For instance, the one I used for the nose, that God has a nose. That's used with inside of an idiom, a Hebraic idiom. They would say, look, these are literary features that speak of these things. So it's not really real, it's just a literary convention to help you and I understand him. And to a certain extent, there's some truth in that. However, I'm saying I understand that there's a metaphor, I understand that we're dealing with idioms. However, what I'm also saying is, it's really, really dangerous, in my estimation. It's dangerous to this extent that if you're going to even broach this idea that God could theoretically have body parts, if you wanted to stay away from that whole possibility, you would never use a body part as a metaphor or a body part as an idiom. You would say something like this: God sees, God hears, God speaks. God goes places. How does he get there? Okay, well, maybe he walks because he's got feet. But I would stay away from saying he had feet. I would stay away from saying the mouth of the Lord. I would stay away from saying the arm of the Lord. I would stay away from saying he has a nose or an eyes or ears. Or a face. I would stay away from those completely if I didn't want anybody to think that there was at least the possibility that he could move towards this and incorporate that into who he is. I would stay completely away from that. Hold on, one and then two. Go ahead, one there.
And just going back in that idea of Moses, you cannot see my face.
Right.
It's like if there's nothing to see, why does he say that? Why does he say that?
Well, and that's interesting. He says to Moses, "You can't see my face," and then later on it says he saw Moses face to face.
Yeah.
So you're going, okay, can I not see your face? Can I see your face? And there were those who saw God and it says they saw God, and they were like, oh, I'm going to die because I've seen God, and yet they lived. All right.
Well, when Samuel was called, there's a part in here where it says that Eli understood that the Lord was calling the boy. He told Samuel, "Go and lie down, and if he calls you, say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.' So Samuel went and lay down in his place. the Lord came, stood there, and called as before.
Right.
So he stood there.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. We have these kind of texts that where you kind of go, well, God is standing. He's supposed to have feet. He's walking. How does he walk? I mean, okay, and again, we could say, well, these are metaphors and these are idioms.
He walked with Adam in the garden.
Yeah, he walked. Yeah. So if God walks. He speaks. How does he speak? He has a mouth. So these are the kinds of things that you see happening in the text that lead us to, okay, he must be able to take on body if he can have all these body parts. And I only got into this part of it, into some of the body. I did 7 body parts. So, yeah. But.
You know, we could investigate this for a long time, but, you know, the one thing we need to really keep in mind is that we're still working in 3 dimensions. I mean,
Right.
Paul himself says that we don't know the length, width, breadth, and height. 4
Agreed.
dimensions minimum.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, it's pretty tough to understand.
Right. We're trying to the finite are trying to understand the infinite. And there's always a part where we come up to a wall and go, okay, we're not going to get past this wall because trying to understand it past that is beyond our abilities to do. So there is a part of that, yes.
After the resurrection, Jesus was cooking fish on the shoreline,
Yes.
and he invited the apostles to come eat with him.
Absolutely.
To show that his humanness.
Right. Absolutely. But here's another thing about that body. It says they were sitting in a room and he just walked through the wall.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know how he does it, you know, but kind of slide through the wall and he's able to be right in their midst. So there's something about this body that does eat and does have regular bodily attributes to it, and yet parts of it that you kind of go, how did he do that? How did he just appear in the middle of the room? You know, so it's both and, yes.
In the Genesis, didn't they say that create man in our image?
Yes.
Okay, there's 2 images possible, spiritual image and physical image.
Yeah, and what do we do with that dualism? I don't know. I know, I'm working through that. That's why I think this image thing is also a part of this, is that somewhere on the throne, this is Daniel's point, Daniel 7:13, is to say there was one seated on the throne who was the Son of Man in these thrones. So there's one who looks like us on the throne. That's Yeshua. Now, we can move on for just a moment here. We can come back to that in a moment. I mentioned earlier before some of you arrived that there's a book out that's called When a Jew Rules the World. I really hope you guys would get this book. It's called When a Jew Rules the World. The subtitle is What the Bible Really Says About Israel in the Plan of God. I mentioned earlier that he has 2 chapters in here detailing anti-Semitism from the time of AD 100 all through up through the 1500s and beyond. And here's the reason why anti-Semitism, what we're talking about today, tomorrow is Yom HaShoah Day, commemorating the Holocaust. And so I want to read to you just a little small excerpt from what Luther had to say. This is Martin Luther, 1500s. Date for this one is 1543.
When did he die?
I don't know his death. I don't know the date of his death, but this particular writing is 54. I don't know. I'd have to look.
I was wondering how close it was to the end, because he got a little better at the end.
Oh yeah, this is towards the end. And this is from his treatise called The Jews and Their Lies. Okay? This is Martin Luther. He says this. He says that the Jews are, quote, a base, whoring people, that is, no people of God, and their boast of lineage, circumcision, and law must be accounted as filth. He says the blind Jews are truly stupid fools, lazy rogues, nothing but thieves and robbers, miserable and accursed, and rejected and condemned people. Their synagogues are, quote, a den of devils in which sheer self-glory, conceit, lies, blasphemy, and defaming of God occur. He goes on to write, such a desperate, thoroughly evil, poisonous, and devilish lot are these Jews, who for these 1400 years have been and still are our plague, our pestilence, and our misfortune. They are venomous, bitter, vindictive, tricky serpents, assassins and children of the devil, who sting and work harm stealthily wherever they cannot do it openly. These venomous serpents and young devils, next to the devil, a Christian has no more bitter and galling foe than a Jew. I mean, And I have not even begun. We have not even started.
No wonder Hitler was so.
Well, yeah, and by the way, it goes on to show how that Hitler used the same language.
Yeah.
And here's what another thing he does. This is really the cool part of the book. He shows how that if you look at the different elements of each of these policies, by the way, I'm just using Luther. I could go and show you what other people said, and it's just as vile. It's just as vile. And here's the thing. He has a chart in here where he shows how the plan, here's the chart. It's called the Christian Foundation of Nazism and the Holocaust. And he shows how what they said, here's what the church decreed. This is Catholicism, and then later on Lutheranism, and then later on Protestantism. How what they decreed was written into Nazi law. The church fathers laid out Nazi doctrine. And so here's the chart. So, in other words, church fathers say, do this. And later on Hitler says, hey, that's a great idea. Let's do that. So he basically implements and had the whole blueprint laid out for him with what the church fathers were saying.
You know, when I'm giving people, when I'm traveling, I meet people wherever I'm meeting, we start talking about, what is this Christianity, what you call it, how do we do it. Many times, Luther is the thing that startles me, is quoted quite often. You know, I mean, Cohen brought up a good point. You know, many other so-called denominations will say, well, you're legalistic, you do. Yet I can't find that word in Scripture anywhere.
Right.
I can't find any place where somebody has said that, because you're following doctrine, all of a sudden you're legalistic. Now, I can see the opposite many times. We're not following doctrine. But the thing that I find very startling is that Martin Luther is an exorcist of many people who say, you know what? If we're supposed to be doing that, he would have posted on that church.
Right.
I was like,
the only thing that Luther was really going after in the 95 Theses that he nailed the Wittenberg door, he was going against indulgences. The Catholic Church was selling indulgences, which was you could donate money to the Catholic Church in the name of a dead relative and get them out of purgatory if you donated enough money. So Luther said, no, salvation is by grace. He kind of came to justification is by grace. You can't pay for somebody to get out of purgatory. This was a huge money-making proposition for the Catholic Church. He said, no, this is not going to work. That's what the 95 Theses was about. It wasn't about the Jews. Now, here's the other point. Here's the point that I'm trying to make with this as well. If you go the route of anti-Semitism, which these church fathers did, throughout history, by the way, the 2 chapters in here just on anti-Semitism is fascinating by itself. But if you go that route, you get rid of the Jews. As soon as you get rid of the Jews, you create a vacuum. So that vacuum has to be filled by somebody. Well, voila, what do you know? It's the Gentile Christians. And therefore, you have replacement theology.
Yeah.
So replacement theology is built on the back of Jewish anti-Semitism. Okay? So he points that out in the book, is that if you're going to go this route of replacement theology, you create a vacuum by getting rid of the Jewish people. And here's the irony. The title of the book is this: there's going to be a Jew that comes back and rules the world.
That's right.
In his ethnicity, in his humanity, he's Jewish. And that really, really bothers a lot of people. They don't like that. So there's this hatred, this anti-Semitism that has been throughout history. And he details it in here really succinctly with each of the different church fathers, leading us all the way through the centuries. And it's fascinating to see how then Hitler takes this and says, you know what, let's make a law based on the laws and the wording of the laws are so similar. You're like, wow, this is blueprint. Yeah.
It's been some time back, but I read an article in one of the magazines, like Israel My Glory, something like that, where one of the editors just had a thought, I'll go out on the street, get your average Christian, your average Jew, your average Muslim, and ask them what they believe the end times will be like. So he found what he thought was an average Christian. The guy's, Messiah returns, so is his kingdom. Okay. He asked the average Jew, Messiah will come. Then he asked the average Arab, the church in Islam will unite to wipe out the Jews. Islam will then wipe out the church, and the world will be free to be Islam.
Right. Yeah, make no mistake. I want to be clear on this. I don't think I grew up in the 80s. I mean, that was the big time. That was the time of growing up. It was the 80s. And how many can you remember in the 80s The 80s was about Russia. You know, in 1980, our hockey team, U.S. hockey team, played Russia in the Olympics, and this was communism versus the free world. And right during that time, to take advantage of that sentiment, there were movies. You had Rocky, who was going to take on, he was going to take on in this battle. He was taking on the Russian, Ivan, right? So it's Rocky Balboa versus Ivan. It's this struggle because Russia is the one that's going to be the problem.
King of the North.
Red Dawn.
Russia isn't the problem. Red Dawn. There are movies also that were about Russia. And how Russia is the problem. Go look at a map. When you get a chance, go look at this map. And the country that's most directly north of Russia, most directly north of Israel, is Turkey. Not Russia. And Turkey's a big country. And by the way, while you're looking at it, look at all of these former Soviet Union countries that are all in with Stan. And all those, Turkey and all these stand countries that are on the lower part of what was the former Soviet Union, are all now Islam. Let me just go on record as saying, look, the problem isn't going to be Russia. The problem isn't going to be the Catholic Church. The problem is going to be Islam.
That's right.
The problem is Islam. Okay? It's messed up. So, yeah, go ahead.
Well, in Daniel and Isaiah and all those, the only enemy battle that God was battling was Islam.
Yes.
Because all those countries, they weren't Islamic then, but he knew they would beat him and all of those.
Right.
That was the one he's battling. And who are we battling now?
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're back to the same issues, same area.
Yeah.
Okay, so, all right, we got to move on. Take the handout I give you called Various Torah Commands Related to Food. I want to go over this really quick. I'm not going to spend time on this part of the most part, but God does care about what we eat. All right. I'll just list these, make a few comments, and then we're going to move forward. Torah prohibits the mixing of species in the field. I'm giving you the text there. In other words, you can't do hybrid crops. The Torah says don't do hybrid crops. That's becoming more and more a big thing. I find it interesting how relevant the Torah is. It's way ahead of its time. Now we're getting into hybrid crops where we're saying, well, let's take some of this crop and we'll fuse it with this one, and because we can do this, we'll create this hybrid crop. And it's like, it's messed up. We're doing this all the time with fruits. We're getting more and more into it with vegetables now.
And they're mixing in some insect.
Yeah, that's another whole issue. All right. While not a Torah command, many Jews do not eat the sciatic nerve based on Genesis 32:32. This is where Jacob is touched in the socket of his thigh, and then it says, the text goes on to say, and many Jews from this point on did not eat this part of the animal. It doesn't say that we were required to, but that's the tradition in the text. Number 3, honey is considered clean, even though the bee which produces it is unclean. Multiple references to the uses of honey give the indication that it was permitted. Now, also, you have another type of honey in the Hebrew scripture. You have date honey that's from dates. And you squeeze the dates, and those dates give off a very sweet, sugary syrup, and you can use that for sweetener as well. All right, number 4. The Torah prohibits the eating of any grains or fruit harvested during the Shemitah year. You can't eat from grains or fruit during that year. You can go out and you can't harvest them. You can go out in your field if you own it and get enough for yourself and your family. Anybody else can go out in that field. Why? The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Everything belongs to Him. So during that year, you have to let the land go. You don't harvest it. You let anybody that wants to go out and get it. And as you an owner, you can also go out and get that food. But you just can't harvest it and then take it to market. Yeah.
You covered it.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
You're smarter than I thought.
Thank you. Leviticus 23:14 forbids the eating of the barley harvest until the offering of first fruit has been given. Leviticus 19:23 prohibits the eating of fruit from newly planted trees for 3 years. If you plant a tree, now obviously this is Israel, specifically Israel. If you plant the tree, a fruit tree, you can't eat from that tree until the 4th year. The first 3 years, you have to let the fruit fall off the tree, and then the 4th year, you can eat from it.
That's when you come into the land.
Yes, that's when you come into land. Absolutely. But even if you plant a new one, you're also supposed to do that.
What's it?
Everyone who owns a field, now look at this one. Everyone who owns a field must leave the corner and edges unharvested, must only harvest the field once, must not reach back for missed produce, and must not pick up dropped fruit, or anything you drop. So look at this, 4 things. You go through the field as you're harvesting. You can only go through the field once as a harvester. If you look back on that row that you've just come down and you go, oh, we missed some stuff, leave it. If you drop anything, leave it. And you leave the corners of the fields. Now, the thing is, it doesn't tell you how much corner to leave. You can leave as much corner as you want. That's between you and God. I must tell you, my friend Gershon, who I'll see again in a couple days, he invited us to his vineyard a couple years back, and we went. It's south of Israel. We get to the vineyard, and he tells us this story. He left the corners of his field. He has a vineyard. He leaves the corners of his field for the poor and the widow and the homeless and says, hey, he puts out the word, come and glean from the corners. And nobody believed him. They all thought, okay, what's the gig? Something's up. He's pulling our leg. There's really no way he's going to let people come and take from his grapes and glean from the corners of his field. This is not going to happen. So nobody came. He kept saying to people, look, no, come glean from the corner of the field. They figure, something's up with this. Nobody believed it because nobody had been doing it. So nobody really believed that it was happening. So here's what he did. Now this, I'm not there yet. I'll be honest with you, I'm not where he's at. He's better than me. The next year, he takes the crops from the corners and he bottles up the wine, corks it, puts it in boxes, and he goes out on the streets and he starts handing out bottles of wine. Now they'll take it.
Yeah.
And he said this to me. I thought this was profound. He said, very, very humble, he goes, if they won't come to my corners, I'm taking my corners to them. And I thought to myself, wow, there's a person who gets the spirit of Torah. If you won't come to my corners, I'll take my corners to you. Yeah.
I'm just thinking of modern times where usually farmers and fruit harvest, there's always fences and there's always like, beware, don't come in. I remember one time just going on a walkathon back in New York and how we saw an apple tree on some of the front. We just went and, I mean, you can't waste it and go and have everyone, take everything, but it was like we took apples, no one ever stopped us.
Right.
It was kind of cool,
Yeah, I must tell you, you talk about the fences. Okay, so if you have fences up and signs that say keep out, and this is a true story. In Wichita, Kansas, there is a gated